measurement for DEI can look like a lot of different things. It could be looking at one, the representation. So looking at representation goals is huge. What are the demographics of that kind of early career talent, middle level management, leadership, executive team? Where are the gaps there when you look at who is actually making it to the executive team and who's making it to that management or leadership level? Where are we seeing some dips and drops? And setting some goals towards that, whether that's gender parity, racial parity. But looking at those disparities is very important.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Latesha Byrd, who is a LinkedIn top voice, executive coach, speaker, and CEO of Perfecta, a talent development agency that helps companies build high-performing teams and puts equity back into talent. During the episode, we discuss why you should prioritize DEI during a recession, the 3 reasons why DEI efforts fail, and how to measure the success of your DEI strategy in 2023. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Hey, Latesha, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hey, I am great. Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you again. I see like you keep showing me up now on LinkedIn, like the video quality is getting better. I can see I can tell you got your little research and scripts going on. I love the consistency with the content right now. It's been really good.
Thank you so much, Chris. I'm trying to get some messages out there around DEI, talent development, but I'm really just trying to keep up with you.
Is there more of a higher pressure now that now you're a top LinkedIn voice and you're recognized by the platform? Is there like this additional pressure? Do you feel like do you have to put more content out?
I don't know if it feels as much as a pressure as almost like a privilege. I know that I have, an audience of people who trust and want to hear what I have to say, especially during a time like this where the workforce is just changing overnight.
Yeah.
I love being able to post content and talk about things that I know other DEI and talent and HR leaders are thinking about.
Yeah, I love the fact that you flipped that to be as a privilege. That's such a, thinking of being, I have a stone that I carry around in my pocket and it says gratitude on it. And it's a perfect example right then. It's a privilege that you're in a position that you're able to post that content and help people as well, right? Part of your why and your purpose. Oh
yeah, I love that. Yeah, and gratitude is one of my values. So I'm big on gratitude. I'm big on affirmations. Every morning I write down, what are 3 things that I'm grateful for today?
Nice.
I think it is important to, especially as a business owner, it's especially important to lead with gratitude.
Yeah, it's not always easy. Yeah, definitely. So tell everyone a little bit more about you, your background and journey to where we are now and the work that you do.
Yeah. So I am from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hopefully we have some folks watching and listening that is from North Carolina as well. So from the South, I am the CEO of Perfecta. We are a talent development agency that helps organizations put equity back into talent. So if you're thinking Perfecta, that's a cool, unique name. What does that mean? It's short for performance, equity, and talent. So again, we help our clients build high-performing teams and put equity back into talent. I truly believe that the workplace is not emotionally safe until the most marginalized employee feels like there is a sense of belonging for them. And so the work that we really do is all about building inclusive, equitable, healthy workplace environments. And we do that through a variety of ways. We do that through trainings. We do that through DE&I consulting, and we do that through coaching as well. So that's a little bit about Perfecta. My background is in recruitment and DE&I and leadership development. As an executive coach, I have coached over, I don't even
lost count
anymore, but at least like 1,000 folks. And I love coaching. And that's really where I started. My business is focused in the kind of leadership development coaching space. And after coaching, Black and brown folks, women, employees or people from the LGBTQ plus community, and also advising executives around talent strategies, I realized that I can coach someone all day long, but if the organizational structure, systems, processes aren't changing to build a healthy workplace environment, there's only so much that, I can do as a coach and my coaching clients can do. And that's really where Perfecta was birthed.
Love it. When did you realize that this was kind of like your mission, your passion? Like, because this isn't the work that you do and the role that you had, in many, for example, the DEI roles didn't exist when we were younger. When did you realize that this was like your calling, if you want to put it that way?
That is such a good question. I actually didn't know I would be doing this work. I wanted to be an accountant. And I was.
Was you an accountant? You actually became an accountant? I can't imagine you. I can't imagine you. I don't think anyone that knows you can probably imagine you being an accountant.
Absolutely not. I was pretty awful. I don't think I was a great accountant. But as a child, I wanted to be an accountant. So my mother raised me, and she worked 2 to 3 jobs to kind of keep the lights on. And I really saw her trying to keep up with the bills. Then I remember her sitting at the kitchen table, kind of going through her bills for the month and figuring out like, okay, if I pay the power bill this month, then I can't pay the phone bill. Let me call them and let's see if we can, do something. I remember being, 6 or 7 and bill collectors are calling the house. And I'm like, they're like, hey, said my mom's name. Is she here? And I said, no, my mom's not here. Like, I got really good at like lying to bill collectors on the phone. And it got to a point where I started helping her create budgets. And I would say, hey, the rent is due on the 1st, going to be late by the 5th. We got these bills. And so when I was like 7 or 8, I wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to work at a fancy bank. I wanted to open up my own accounting firm. And so I did start in accounting. Pretty quickly realized that this is not for me. Like looking at all the spreadsheets and numbers gave me a headache. So I started getting involved in some recruiting efforts, absolutely loved it, and decided from that moment forward that I wanted to be in the talent acquisition space. Yeah. So that was my transition into like the people talent space.
Love that. Your mom seems like an amazing person. What would you say is the key lessons and values that you took from your mom?
That's a great question. I would say it's working hard, of course, is really important. And I do feel like, I've worked for everything that I have. And a lot of what I learned from, my mom is like what not to do. And I learned that I wanted to have a career. I wanted to do something that I was passionate about, that I enjoyed. I did not ever want to see work as like a means to an end, And so I'm really passionate about understanding and exploring our relationships with work, our relationships with, our career. And, it is important to just have a life of fulfillment, even outside of work. Even if you are fulfilled by work, it is still important to have a life of fulfillment outside of that. So I learned some qualities around, how to work hard, but in terms of the actual, like what working looks like, that is something that I kind of learned through, like seeing her not ever love what she did and just see it as like, okay, I got to take care of my family. And so I want to make sure that I am, doing something that I love for my kind of future generations, future offsprings.
Yeah. A lot of us take that for granted, right? Because, I have this conversation with my friends all the time. We talk about work and I realized that unfortunately, the vast majority of my friends don't actually enjoy what they do. So when they say, Chris, you're always working. Why are you working on Saturday and Sunday? I'm like, but I enjoy it. It's fun.
Oh, yeah.
But they don't get it. So like, why would you work on Saturday? I'm like, because it's fun. But and again, talking about gratitude, I'm very grateful that I'm in that position. But I was intentional, like to your point, of putting myself in that position. I didn't want work to be something that happens to me that I'm not in control of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you run your career, you run your business.
Yeah,
you don't let it run you.
There you go. You put it great. Mm-hmm. So I saw some of your LinkedIn posts recently, and it got me thinking. I knew you was coming on the show, and I was like, "There's some hot topics right now that a lot of leaders that I'm speaking to are kind of steering away from." They want to get in trouble. Well, one of those was around DE&I, during a recession. I've seen a lot of companies pull back on budgets. And we had this conversation off air, right? As well, whereas, we both agree that now more than ever, we should be leaning even further into our DEI work and investment as well. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation that I've had every single day with a different talent or HRDI leader around this. It's true now that we are moving into this recession, or I guess the recession is here.
It's here.
Right?
It's here, yeah.
Yeah, it's literally here. There's so much going on right now. I mean, I feel like we were finally starting to bounce back from the pandemic, and it's like, boom, recession, right? And so companies are, depending on the industry, seeing this a lot in tech, going through those layoffs and hiring freezes and budget cuts. Unfortunately, DEI is one of those things that does get cut. DEI leaders are being let go. Companies are scaling back completely on recruiting efforts. So that means there's no inclusive recruiting that's happening. There's no diverse talent pipelining that's happening. And the hard part about this is that even if companies are laying off employees, even if they're letting people go, this is not the time to cut DEI budgets at all. This is the time to up the investment, because studies show that when companies are going through, restructuring and economic uncertainties, even if they say they let 13, 15% of their workforce go, right, there's going to be an additional percentage of folks that leave because that feeling of safetyness and belonging is lost.
Yeah.
Right. It is more important than ever to focus on retention, to focus on development, to focus on advancement. And companies get this wrong because they're like, we're just going to cut people. We're going to say we are committed to DEI, but we don't have a DEI team. You don't have anybody leading this efforts, And I think, during 2020, companies were getting called out where they were saying we're committed and we're standing with the Black community and all these, historically excluded communities. And people were like, yeah, but like, what about your employees internally? And I think we're still going to see that accountability from employees even now in 2023. And this is the time to really build that trust. So it makes me sad and to see and disappointed to see companies cut DE&I, because in the long run, it is going to hurt their productivity. It's going to hurt their belonging. And guess what? This recession is not going to last forever, right? Recessions don't last for like 20 years. Eventually, the economy is going to get back to normal. Eventually, companies are going to hire again, and then they're going to have to start from ground zero because they let all of that progress really go to waste.
Yeah, and I don't. One thing that's just definitely true is that those employees won't forget.
That's right.
They won't forget. They won't forget the way you made them feel and the actions that you took as an organization when times are tough. Your actions didn't back up your words. Let's just say it that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And as soon as you lose that trust, it's so difficult, almost impossible to regain it. Once you've lost
for sure.
It's really tough.
Oh, for sure.
As well. And it's good though, because in some ways it's good because I've seen companies that are really committed double down. And I'm like, great. So they're actually living their truth, right? And their values and their purpose. And again, that's being reflected in increased engagement, productivity, hiring, etc. And then you see those other companies that they were really doing this as sort of a tick the box exercise, and they only did it because of pressure from the outside, right? As well. And those are the companies that are just immediately pulling back on the investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I am traveling right now. So I'm currently in Austin, Texas, and I am here speaking at one of my clients' annual conferences. And the company is Zapier, which is a SaaS company, really, really cool product. And I've been able to spend time with their CPO or Chief People Officer and their head of Divi. And, they're doubling down on their diversity efforts. Mm-hmm. And it is so incredibly fulfilling and just cool to see, because they recognize that this is important and we got to keep the great people that we have right now.
What advice would you give to those DI leaders, or even just leaders in general, right? This is a responsibility of everyone, not just the D&I function or HR. What advice?
Oh gosh, I love that. I love that question.
What advice would you give to them during this time, especially though? Because, it's tough.
Yeah, great question. It's one, I know that DEI leaders are being challenged to operate at very, very, very lean. And with that being said, we actually at Perfecta released a report on how to integrate DE&I into the employee life cycle and really into the various functions of an organization. Because when DEI is done right, that means that it's not just kind of in an isolated function, but it is integrated into performance management, into onboarding, into recruiting, even into, the advancement processes around maybe even learning and development, even the exit process, right?
Yeah.
There's supplier diversity and looking at, not only how are we thinking about serving our internal employees, but what about our customers? What about our stakeholders? What
And
about
communities.
the community?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
You got
it. We're on the same page. And so when DEI is done right, it is integrated across the entire company. And what I would advise or encourage DEI leaders to do is to start having the conversations with the right folks at the organization, identify who your internal stakeholders are, right? And I have so much respect for DEI leaders and work with them, every day, of course, because they are having to, really support the entire company. And sometimes they might be a team of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and they're supporting hundreds or thousands of employees. But I would encourage DEI leaders to identify your stakeholders, understand what are the gaps there, how can they integrate DE&I into the work that they're doing. So that might look like meeting with the CMO, right, head of marketing at an organization, and asking them, what are your challenges around communicating DEI to our employees? Is that something that you have done? And is that something you thought about? Making sure they actually see the benefit of it. To partner on DEI communication strategy, crisis communication strategy, right? That's a great way. Meeting, of course, with the head of HR, looking at those performance management talent processes, meeting with the person that's responsible for corporate social responsibility, and just identifying those Partnerships and what an effective kind of cross-functional collaboration could look like. We created a DEI framework. And this is a framework that we created that helps organizations assess their current DEI maturity and their ideal DEI maturity. And we base it on 6 criteria sets: governance, talent programs, accountability and reporting, employee experience and culture, stakeholder engagement. There's always one that I forget. It's something that's out there, but based on those 6 areas, they're able to see where are the clear gaps in my organization that we really should be focused on. And it's with DEI, we can't boil the ocean, and there is something really, really important about being intentional on not just the stakeholders that DEI leaders are partnering with, but the amount of work that they are committed to doing. If you move too fast, folks can get burnt out. If you move too slow, then folks can get disengaged. So speed and pace is also really important.
Love that. And you've mentioned earlier you've spoken to and coached hundreds, maybe even close to 1,000 leaders. What are the top things that you see that they get wrong? You're having these conversations, you're kind of identifying these areas of improvement. What are the common things that keep coming up over and over again?
With DEI?
Yeah, like what in terms of the mistakes that the leaders make when it comes to the DEI? What are the big mistakes that you can point out that hopefully our audience can avoid?
Yeah, there's a couple of things I would say in terms of some challenges here. One is that DEI feels really important, and there's a difference between DEI being important versus being urgent, right? We cannot act on every single thing at one time. And it is important to really think about what is our risk appetite, what are, the resources that we're willing to put towards this, how are we measuring and tracking success, and thinking about the long-term, kind of game plan and strategy, while also being focused on what needs to get done really in the next 60 to 90 days. So just because everything feels important, it may not be urgent. And I also see in the industry that sometimes there's just not enough visibility at the top of the organization. And it's so important for HR talent, DEI leaders to get a lot of face time with the executive teams, because you never want them to, not be invested, to not be bought in. to not be aware of actually what's happening at the company. Because even employees, even those early career employees, are looking at the C-suite. They're looking at the executive team to lead from the top down. They are going to ask, what are we doing here? And if the leader is not able to answer that, then that is going to be a challenge. So making sure that there is a direct line of sight to C-suite, making sure that communications is very, very clear, making sure that an organization has identified what is going to be the most important thing we get done in the next 90 days. Again, we call those quick wins at Perfecta. And, it's also important to put resources towards this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And understand that building a successful DEI program or strategy, it's a long-term thing, right?
It's not a project. It's not like something.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's not a project. You can't just launch one thing and then maybe it doesn't go well. And it's like, okay, well, DEI doesn't work. That doesn't work. Let's just scrap it all, right? I see that other business leaders get the opportunity to try, fail, reinvent. And sometimes with DEI, it is held to such a highly criticized or under a highly criticized lens that DEI leaders don't get the same grace. And it is really, really challenging to, create something, know exactly how it's going to go as an organization, because it depends on the employees. It depends on the industry. There's so many factors.
The economic climate.
What might work, the economic climate, and what might work well for one company just may not work well for another.
Yeah, that's also
true. And so I really hope that, DEI leaders are able to get the grace that they deserve, the resources that they deserve, and then just the time to really build out something successful. And something that we often tell our client partners is that your first DEI program initiative that you launch, when you look back 2-3 years later, it's going to be in a completely different place. And so give yourselves opportunity to scale it over time, just as, we as business owners scale our businesses, just as other kind of business leaders get to scale and grow their functions. With DEI, it is something that has to be scaled and nourished over time.
Yeah, love that. And it's you mentioned a point earlier about identifying what those quick wins are. It's important, right? Like you said, don't try and boil the ocean immediately. Right. Focus on meeting those leaders, understanding what their priorities are, understanding how this, that they need to understand what it means for them as well in their role. It can't just be about you and your vision and initiative as well, but then figuring out, what are those quick wins? Where can we have immediate impact, and then build from there, right? We made it sound a lot more simple than it is along the way.
It's hard work.
Yeah, it's hard work, right? Yeah. Exactly, hard work. And I hear that from everyone. What about, like, you mentioned measurement earlier, and this is something that comes up all the time, amongst our audience and listeners, is how do you measure DEI? I'm sure you get that question quite a lot. What's the typical reply advice do you give to people about how do I measure what does good look like?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I like to challenge and push back on our clients when they ask that. It's how much are you investing first in this, and then that way let's figure out what the ROI is. Measurement for DEI can look like a lot of different things. It could be looking at, one, the representation. So looking at representation goals is huge. What are the demographics of that kind of early career talent, middle level management, leadership, executive team? Where are the gaps there when you look at who is actually making it to the executive team and who's making it to that management or leadership level? Where are we seeing some dips and drops, and setting some goals towards that, whether that's gender parity, racial parity. But looking at those disparities is very important. Yeah. It could also be in learning and development, right? And so looking at what we do at Perfecta is we host a lot of, or facilitate trainings for our clients on DE&I topics. So, allyship, bias, privilege, inclusive leadership. And we always like to do, some pre and post learner surveys to really assess what their actual understanding, comfortability, personal accountability feels like after our sessions as it relates to being an inclusive leader, right? That's, a way to really measure those learning outcomes and goals is one. Performance management systems is great too. An organization can really look at what are the ratings for those from historically excluded communities, comparing that to their white colleagues. Are we seeing disparities there? So from a quantitative standpoint, there's always, the money factor too, right? So even doing some pay equity audits, right? There is something valuable of not measuring DE&I always from a quantitative standpoint, because sometimes it is hard to throw a number if you're not looking at a specific program, or system. But I see a lot of companies do, again, those representation goals is huge. But outside of that, it's actually talking to employees and getting feedback. Something that we tell our clients often is make sure that there is an ongoing kind of feedback loop and really just listen. Do some listening sessions with your employees. Ask them for their feedback, rolling out those employee engagement surveys, of course, but there's nothing like actually understanding the stories,
No, that's just, you're right. Because for example, like retention is one of the things I hear all the time. Look at your retention. Because if people feel like they truly belong in part of the organization, then you're going to have increased retention there. But doing those, say, surveys, pulse surveys, or even having the one-on-one conversations, which all leaders and managers should be having, what are you hearing in those conversations, right? They cannot necessarily be measured. You can't put a number on it.
That's right.
It's important.
But retention is huge. Retention, attrition, turnover, all of that's extremely important. Even for someone that leaves a role and looking at the advancement. So what does internal mobility or upward mobility look like? I think it is so important to break this down by demographic groups. That is really the way to assess where those gaps are.
Yeah, even just all the way from it's got to start straight away from the onboarding experience, right? Even
absolutely.
Before that, even just writing the job description, I can't imagine. I can't tell you the amount of times I see job descriptions on LinkedIn where I'm like, oh, it's like you still don't get it.
You still don't get it, and it you can tell that the job description is it's exclusionary in a sense.
Yeah,
when you say things like, we want to hire a rock star, like, I don't need to be a rock star at work, right? Or they're like, we have ping pong tables in our office. Like, no one cares about that anymore. It's like, talk about more of your like inclusive policies that you have. Right? What are the things, even for women, that we need to see in a JD before applying to the role? And, parental leave is something that's really important. A lot of employees now are looking for benefits as it relates to like mental health, remote opportunities, but it is important for companies to not put so much like fluff in their job description and try to sound like this cool, hip company. It's really not about that at all. So I've seen some pretty terrible job descriptions, I will say.
What during your job, I'm sure you have a lot of conversations that have to be kept confidential behind closed doors, right? A lot of these conversations, right, comes part of the role, What are the things that DI leaders don't talk about enough, but they really should? What are those things that you hear and you speak about, but they don't want to voice because they're part of an organization, they can't. There's a brand associated, etc. What are the things that DI leaders are not talking about enough, but they really should be?
The fact that DI leaders still have to, and again, it depends on the organization, okay? It depends on the industry. But the fact that DI leaders are having to almost like fight for their budget or prove their success every single step of the way. Like I said before, DI is held under a very critical lens, more than other business functions that I've seen. And so even just pushing for certain policies to get, brought to an organization. Even when it comes to certain programming, bringing in external partners, there is such an uphill battle that DEI leaders face, but they don't often talk about that, and those are some of the conversations that, I have with them, and just the high expectations. I've talked to DEI leaders that were brand new at an organization, and in their first 3 months, they were tasked with building out a DEI roadmap, like a 5-year plan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty tough job, pretty tough thing to do. In addition to getting onboarded, learning about the culture, talking to the key stakeholders, understanding what's actually been done before they got here, right? Mm-hmm. What's worked, maybe what's not worked, what trainings have happened. I have so much respect for DEI leaders because the work is hard. The work is brutal. It's so fulfilling. It really, really is. But, if I can also add a second part to this too, is that DEI leaders are often tasked with building and creating safe spaces at their companies during traumatic events and things that happen, while also having to process that trauma on their own. So when we look at harm that's done to, certain communities, right? During Lunar New Year, there was a shooting. We're seeing police brutality towards, young Black men and women in the States. We're seeing so many different things happen to historically excluded communities where DEI leaders are tasked with, thinking about the strategy behind putting out communications, thinking about ways to support employees that may be grieving, that may be processing it. But the question is, who is actually holding space for me as a DEI
whilst
leader?
you're grieving, you're in that same process as well, and you're trying to then help others whilst you're grieving personally. But who's there for you?
Yeah. So that's something I would say I think is a big, big, big thing that we don't talk a lot about. I would love to, meet other DEI leaders or practitioners and have space for us to come together and talk about what's going on in the world right now and what does holding space look like when they're the ones doing this for so many others.
Well, we've got to create that. Well, immediately, we need to create a group.
We need to do it.
If that group doesn't already exist, that needs to happen immediately. Because that's something that we do in the HR space, right? Because HR shares a lot of what you just said. Again, in the past, they have to justify their budget. You wouldn't ask marketing, sales, supply chain, operations to have to justify it in the same way HR has done. And also historically, to your point, who does HR turn to when they're struggling? Because they're
absolutely.
So there's a lot of synergies. And even talking about the seat at the table, right? It took forever for HR to really finally get a seat at the table, right? Now it's now it's the same thing that we're seeing with D&I.
Yeah. Well, and even with HR too, like you said, it's who is actually showing up for our HR folks, right? Because sometimes they're having to make. Here's the thing about HR that I really admire and appreciate is that HR professionals do such a great job of balancing employee needs with the business needs, or with the executive's needs. And sometimes they have to do what's best for the business, whether that's instituting a new policy program, something around
or redundancies.
Yeah, exactly. And that might not always land well, for employees, right? And it's how can HR professionals or leaders kind of find that balance to where they are getting the support they need when they're having to make some really hard decisions.
Yeah, no, definitely. Oh, we're going to create an event. We're going to make it happen, everyone. We're going to figure it out. We've got to bring these two together.
Let's do it.
There's a lot of shared goals. Listen, before I let you go, I wanted to quickly jump into the quick fire round. But you've only got 30 seconds per question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
What are your hobbies and passions outside the office?
Anything related to art, music.
Oh, okay.
I love going to the museum. I'm really into fitness now. So
Nice.
yeah, shopping. I'm an outside girl. My friends know this. So you can count on me to go to the spa, go to brunch, go to a concert. So
You sound like
yes,
you get along well with my wife.
yes, we need to meet.
If you could click your fingers and change one thing around D&I, what would you change?
I would change. I want DEI teams to be resourced very, very, very well.
Okay.
That's the one thing I would change.
Yeah. How would your family and friends describe what you do for a living?
My friends would say that I am always either calling companies out on how to be more inclusive.
Sure.
And I'm like speaking the real on that. My family has no idea. They still think I should go get a job. And I've been a full-time entrepreneur for years now.
Love it. Love it. What legacy do you want to leave behind for your family?
I want to leave behind a legacy of just no financial struggle. I want them to be able to explore, my children, to explore their passions, their hobbies, to figure out what they want to do and have the actual resources to be able to do that. And I was stressed as a teenager to make money. And I don't want my family to go through that. So that is really important for me, is that they have that financial kind of safety net. So that they can become who they really, truly need to become or want to become.
We share that so much in common, by the way. That whole,
I love that.
Growing up, we were on the same thing. Single parent, 4 kids. My mum trying to barely making enough money for us, and us trying to find money around the house just to get some food and stuff like that. And the strain that it put on us financially as kids. Hence why I didn't go to school. I got a job at 17. Wow. I got a job at 17 and went straight into business to help my mum and make money. So I do want Robin. That's something I do want Robin to be able to be a kid and not have to worry about money and where food's coming from, and let her explore that. But also part of me feels like there does need to be a level of challenge and resilience, because that's also what made you who you are and who I am, right? It shaped us and made us strong in that sense.
I love that. Thank you.
Biggest investment you've made in yourself?
In myself?
Yeah, biggest investment you've made in yourself. What would you say?
I would say coaching.
Yeah.
I am a coach. I'm a fan of coaching. I've had coaches in my career since 25.
Nice.
So I will always have someone that is coaching, mentoring, or advising me, so I can get out of my own way, and I have someone that can challenge those roadblocks and push me in to see things for myself that I sometimes don't see.
Yeah, it's important, right? It's just important. It's sometimes not. It's hard to hear, but you need to hear it.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Last question: what is your parting piece of advice for the D&I leaders of tomorrow?
Parting advice for DI leaders of tomorrow is to be strategic, ask the right questions, find the right stakeholders, and know that this work is not easy, but it's necessary, it's important, and just a big thank you. I guess a thank you is not a part of the advice, but I don't think that they hear thank you enough. So please know that you are valued, you're needed in this work, and you're changing that workplace inside and out.
Amazing. And give yourself grace.
Yeah, give yourself grace always.
As well. Well, listen, thanks so much for coming on. Where can people connect with you? If they want to reach out to you, check out your organization, where's the best place?
Yeah, so go to goperfecta.com. That's where you can find us. Of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, Latesha Byrd, on Twitter and Instagram. I'm really active on Twitter. It is Latesha_Byrd. So that's where you can find me.
Nice. And for everyone listening, those links are all in the description, wherever you're listening or watching. So make sure you go and click those links. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you again soon. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.